No one has ever received more attention for failing the bar exam than JFK Jr. No pony ride has received more press than that of Quentin Roosevelt's. And Chelsea Clinton is quite possibly the only person to have a former landlord write an article about her recycling habits. To be the child of a president is to be a member of an exclusive club that promises not only privilege and glamour, but also unending scrutiny and high expectations. From baby Ruth Cleveland to Amy Carter, these children have become American royalty, but it is a crown some would rather not wear.
I mean to run hard, to fight hard, to stand on the issues, and I mean to win.
I was working for George Bush Sr. in his campaign and pre-campaign, and his son came in, George W. So I worked for George W. Bush throughout the campaign, and he was my boss, got to know him. When it was all over, we were sitting in his office. His dad was now president-elect, and at one point he said, what's going to happen to me? I said, you want me to do a memo on presidential children, what happens to them? He said, sure. It was very dark. It was stunning. It seemed like higher than average rates of alcoholism and divorce and even premature death.
How does a child live up to their father when their father is the most powerful man in the world? The challenge George W. Bush faced is one that began with the first children, the Adamses.
Well, this is the birthplace home of John Adams. He was born here in 1735. The house was actually built in 1681. Together with the house next door where John Quincy Adams was born, these are the oldest presidential birthplaces in the country.
John Adams put so much pressure on his children to succeed, he drove 2 to drink, 1 to an early death. Adams once wrote, "My children give me more pain than all my enemies." The eldest son, John Quincy Adams, buckled under the pressure and nearly flunked out of Harvard.
And so what does his father do? Well, his father writes him these hectoring letters, and in one of them he says that if you do not rise to the top, not only of your profession, but of your country, it will only be because of your laziness, slovenliness, and obstinacy. And this is one way dynasties perpetuate themselves. I mean, it's not just the fact that the father was president, it's also that they keep the pressure on.
John Quincy Adams did not disappoint his father and became the 6th president of the United States. But he later wrote of his term in office, "I can scarcely conceive a more harassing, wearying, teasing condition of existence. It literally renders life burdensome." Subsequent to his presidency and the death of his father, Adams chose to serve 18 enjoyable years as a Massachusetts congressman.
I think a great burden is off him. He doesn't have to be president anymore, but he doesn't have to try to be president anymore. That's the important thing. He has fulfilled his father's ambitions for him and his own ambitions for himself. He got to the top. He proved that he was not lazy, slovenly, or obstinate. Then in John Quincy Adams's family, he also has 3 sons. One of them, Charles Francis Adams, becomes congressman, diplomat. The other 2 sons become drunks, and one of them possibly a suicide.
John Quincy Adams had burdened his sons with the same expectations his father had heaped upon him. George Bush, son of a senator, entered politics by choice. He and his wife Barbara had 4 sons. Each was encouraged to do what they wanted.
I asked one of his brothers about who was the more politically inclined and who was more likely to pick up the baton. And I said, what about George? He's the oldest. He said, George, he's the family clown. That was the image.
I'll say one thing about campaigning for office in West Texas. You sure do get to do plenty of driving. I'm George Bush, running for the Congress. I'm George Bush, nice to see you, running for the Congress.
George Bush,
Good to see you, sir.
businessman,
Appreciate y'all.
independent oil and gas producer,
Thanks for coming.
and now a candidate for Congress.
I feel sure I can be an effective congressman. I'll listen to you, I'll work hard for you, and I'll introduce and vote for legislation that's in our best interest. Together, we can do a lot for West Texas.
George W. Bush dipped his toe into the family business and lost his first election. Then he flopped in the oil business. It's often the curse of firstborns, especially namesakes, that failure leads to personal problems.
Even as the Adamses had to deal with alcoholism, well, so do the Bushes. I mean, this is an issue in their family. George W. Bush has never said that he was an alcoholic. He never used that word, but he has said, he's been quite open about it, that he had problems with drinking.
George W. Bush is one of those few people who woke up one morning at the Broadmoor in Colorado and said, I'm not going to take another drink, and changed himself, his family, his marriage, everything was different.
George W. put himself in the national spotlight at the 1988 Republican Convention.
Texas cast all its votes for her favorite son and the best father in America, George Bush.
Once his father was in office, George W. found success in business. In 1989, he rounded up investors to purchase the Texas Rangers baseball team. Then, in 1993, he won the first of 2 terms as Texas governor. Many accused him of riding to success on his father's coattails. Few thought they'd take him higher.
Mr. Chairman, delegates and my fellow citizens, I proudly accept your nomination.
John Quincy Adams felt compelled to meet his father's expectations. As president, George W. Bush has kept a public distance from his father, whether it's for political purposes or to prove he's his own man.
All children, not just sons, but daughters, all children seek the approval of their father. And they seek it through one of 2 ways, through mimicry or completion.
Critics of the Bush administration say he's rehashing his father's agendas.
I think for the New York Times to say that George Bush would commit U.S. lives to Iraq for political purpose stinks. And American people ought to be outraged at that kind of journalism. That's what we call impact journalism.
Second, we have arrived at an important moment in confronting the threat posed to our nation and to peace by Saddam Hussein and his weapons of terror.
When it comes to the war with Iraq, it's called completion. I've had people suggest to me that George W. Bush escaped this syndrome that occurs to so many presidential children, especially firstborn who are named after a president. And I've concluded, knowing him and also from this study, that he didn't escape at all, he just survived it.
Because of you, our nation is more secure. Because of you, the tyrant has fallen and Iraq is free.